Hello to everybody that is joining us. Hello to the Coach's Corner. How is everybody tonight as you're all coming in?
Doing great, Vesper. How are you?
I'm lovely. Thank you. I'm
Thanks
just
for
going to,
having us.
yay, thanks for being here. I love having you guys here. I'm going to say a couple words and then I'm going to disappear. So, everybody that is tuning in, feel free to ask questions. Try to keep them on topic if at all possible. We realize some people might be watching with us on Zoom itself. So, if you are one of those people, please make sure that your cameras are off. Your video is off and you are muted so we don't pick up any background noise, and that would be lovely. I think that's about it for my housekeeping rules. And I'm going to pass this off to you lovely gentlemen. And Duke Sean, if you wouldn't mind giving us a little heads up on what we can expect.
Happy to. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us on the Coach's Corner again. We've got a really great episode for you tonight, I think. It's a discussion on the comparison between the mindset between practice and tournament. This is one of the most difficult transitions for most people to make, especially people who want to compete in tournaments and want to do well. And it can be really difficult to go from a training mindset to a competitive tournament mindset. And so we've got a great panel with us tonight to discuss that. We've got Viscount Tristan, who is mundanely has an Aikido dojo, in addition to his experience in SCA combat. Duke Ragnvaldr from Mid-Realm, and Viscount Sagan, who gave me tremendous insights on this particular aspect of fighting as I was coming up. So super excited. Please feel free to ask any questions. Go ahead and post those in the Facebook group. I think we may also have some folks coming into the Zoom meeting itself. There is a link on the Coach's Corner that was posted earlier that has the Zoom link. So if you'd like to join us, feel free to jump in and you can ask your questions directly. So with that, we're going to start with a kind of definition of what these two different environments and these two different mindsets are. And for that, I'm going to turn this over to Sagan and let him give us some insight on that.
Thank you, Your Grace. Hey, everybody, welcome again. We, as usual, welcome you to the Coach's Corner. We want questions. We want you to feel free to ask them. If it's something detailed, we will get back to you. If it's something very quick, we can answer it now. The mental side. The mental side is the side that I have focused on in all of the training I've ever done, whether it's with myself or trainees. The differences are quite obvious. In training, the mental side is basically you're paying attention to your trainer. However, in practice, they're going to ask you to perform as trained. The mental side suddenly changes now because even in that practice, you're somewhat thinking about, hey, this is my trainer, but you're also being told by your trainer, I need this to be opponent versus opponent so I can see how well you performed as trained. Now, all of a sudden, you decide it's time to enter Crown Tournament. This is where things change quite a bit for some and not much for others. The more you can get into the mental side in opponent versus opponent in practice, this transition is easy. If you are not at ease on the mental side with opponent versus opponent, this side going into combat can really present you with some challenges. Your performance can be really affected by how into the mental side you get in Crown Tournament or whatever tournament it is, or how much you don't. And that will be the subject that we are going to address tonight. And the one thing about the mental side, and I think you've heard me say this before, a lot of times it is not the side that's trained extensively. The physical side is. All right, and with that, I will now pass you off to His Excellency Viscount Tristan.
Thanks. That was a great lead in. The couple of ways, some things that I was thinking about this week with this episode coming up of, how to get it. I think get to that mental sharpness that you need to do to perform in tournament. I was one of those fighters for the longest time. I did really well at practice, and then once I got to the tournament, I didn't perform as well as I did in practice, and that's something I really needed to work on. And it can be very difficult for some people, and like His Excellency said, some others handle it very smoothly, just like they think, well, the fight's just a fight, it's not any big deal. It's when you have that pressure on that you want to win that it matters. That's a very important distinction that happens mentally. Now, when I teach martial arts, especially for those people that are very self-defense focused, when your safety is at risk and you know your life could be on the line, there's a lot of pressure there. That's the kind of pressure you deal with in a tournament situation where you want to win, you want to perform at your best, you want to end the day as the victor. And that pressure can bring out the worst, and it can bring out the best in someone. And of course, how you prepare yourself for it will set yourself up for success or failure. And so all of that comes back to the training cycle. And before we get into the depth of it, I think I'll let Ragnvaldr kind of get his start as well here tonight.
I think you guys mentioning the mental state, I think that's what it really comes down to, practicing actual tournaments in practice. We spoke before when we were talking about how to control a fighter, how the things that we do, and asking ourselves why. For me, I think what people need to ask themselves is why they're fighting in the tournament, just like you do with everything else. So it'll help give you a better idea of your mindset. So I've got some more notes here, and I think they'll come up later.
So one of the things about the differences for me between tournament and practice, I try to, as Sagan taught me, we try to make practice more and more like live combat. As they say in certain military circles, the more you sweat in training, the less you bleed in combat. And the more you can do that work in training and do the hard work, it makes you easier to execute in tournament. In the Ducal interviews that Sir Rifkin's been doing, the Murder of Duke series, one of the common threads that comes up in there a lot is this idea that that you have to approach the tournament with a certain attitude, and it is a winning attitude, and it is the idea that you're going to go in and you own the field and you own the tournament, and and that everybody else, you have to take this field from me. There is definitely some truth to that. My experience was just a little different in that I actually had to let go of some of that to be able to fight free, to be able to fight true to who I am. And there was a period of time early on in my competitive fighting where the desire to win was absolutely debilitating to me, and it wasn't until I was able to let that go that I was able to just approach the fight as if it was just another day, because we put a great deal of emphasis and importance on the tournaments that we fight, and that can be, as Tristan mentioned, I think that can be for good or for ill. One of the things I think that hurts people the most in tournament, and the biggest reason that I think a lot of people are hesitant to fight tournament, is because there is this impression that a tournament is a place where you are being judged, where like a character assault, like a judgment value of you're a bad person because you only went 2 rounds. And we put this pressure largely on ourselves, and it's being able to free ourselves of that pressure that will allow us to simply execute whatever the fight is that we have in that moment. As I often say, fight the fight you have, not the fight you wish you had. just go ahead and execute the best fight that you have at that time. And it's either good enough or it's not. And if it's not, we'll find out why, and we'll go back to the training process and we'll go back to fix that. Conversely, practice is where we are basically programming our onboard computer, right? This is the opportunity we have to make the mistakes and to fail, and to go through all that process where it doesn't matter and we don't have that emotional baggage that we pile on ourselves in a tournament, because we don't have the same stakes involved. And so it's a lot easier. And the thing of that is, though, we need to take that time in practice to hone our craft and to be better at our craft. If we go into practice with a winning mindset or this idea that we have to win practice, you're not focusing on what needs to be fixed, and you're just focusing on the win, and that doesn't make you a better fighter. That may win you some fights of practice, and that might feel good, but it still doesn't even feel the same as being in a tournament, because the stakes are just that much higher. So, Sagan, you got any more thoughts on that?
Well, the one thing that we worked on with you, like you said, we had to get you from one place to another, and thank you for allowing me the privilege of working with you on that. It made a dramatic difference in your fighting. The other thing that can be devastating is that in the mindset of a tournament where you feel, okay, this is the day, and you go out in the third round and you get aced, and you're laying there on the ground, and all of a sudden your mental side just goes, shit, right? Because the training and the practice wasn't in place that is an option, that can happen. Okay, we've been over it before. If you lose, don't lose the lesson. Okay, so you get up, you dust yourself off, and you get ready for the next fight. If on the other side, you find yourself down in the dumps because of that loss, now you're in a whole different place. And that I would counsel you to get out of that place as soon as possible, whatever it takes to do that. But that's the other important side of in practice, having practice tournaments, getting if the local practice doesn't want to do one, or the local group doesn't want to do one, get 6 or 7 people and fight round robin a couple of times, right down to the point where you have a herald calling out the fights, and you acknowledge your consort and you acknowledge your opponent, just like it will be on that day. The closer to how real it is in practice as it will be in combat, the better off you are. And at this point, at that tournament, practice tournament, okay, this isn't training. This is where you are going to perform. This is where you get that mindset where mentally and physically you go out, you salute your opponent. Before you even stepped onto the field, you were ready to go. Absolutely. Mentally and physically, you were ready to go. This is going to be a test of performance, mentally and physically, of how you've trained and practiced to this point. And the lessons out of that are something is real. You can lock on to that. If you go from that type of tournament, though, and you get to crown, now crowns are crowns. Okay, this is a different place to be, like is Grace said, right? If the stakes are higher. Yeah, well, maybe. If you make them that much higher, now you've put a load on the mental side that if it dramatically affects you in a negative manner, you need to address that. Okay, if it doesn't, okay, move forward. But the idea here is prepare mentally as you would physically, and test it as often as you can, once a month, right? I don't know whether your crowns are going to be once every 4 months or once every 6. There's still plenty of room in there. Plus, there's all the other tournaments, lesser tournaments to crown. So there's plenty of opportunity that you can exercise that performance test, is the way I put it. Gain the lessons from it. When you start hanging around the top 2%, and they're talking about their performance in a tournament, and they come off the field and everybody's like, man, that was really great. And they're going, that wasn't that good at all. Well, why not? Well, my hand was too low. I led with my left foot instead of my right. I got off balance and the power wasn't there. And you'll hear them, right? And they're going on about what they learned in that one fight at Crown. Now then, these individuals are going to make adjustments on the fly. Whether or not you're capable of doing that, well, based on how well you, again, have trained and practiced that mental side. And that's it. On any given day, any given fighter with any given weapons form in any given fight can best another one. Okay? So that's the way you got to go into it. And you cannot go into it with the mental attitude of, oh, that's doofus. I've aced doofus in the last 4 crowns. Can't go in with that mental attitude because all you know, doofus has been training and practicing 3 and 4 times a week, has done a lot of practice tournaments. And now they are ready for Crown. So no preconceived ideas.
Yeah, that's why I don't like Rolodexing fighters.
Yeah,
You get this idea of, oh well, this fighter likes to do this and likes to do this, and there's a lot of fighters that rely on that Rolodex, and they rely on their knowledge of a particular fighter, and and that's one of the other things I got from you is you don't know what that guy has done in the last 6 months.
no
You don't know
idea.
what that guy has done in the last 6 days or the last 6 minutes.
And that fits in where your graces have before talked about probing, right?
Yeah.
Probing will tell you, hey, it's doofus, but oh wait, that's not working. This isn't working, and he's faster than he was last time. So
Yeah, and that's one of those things that I mean, even fight to fight in a particular tournament, and again, for good or for ill, if you come through and you just say you one shot doofus in round 2, and then you fight him in the semifinals or even the finals, he's going to be a different fighter than he was in round 2.
mhm.
And we've got to accommodate for that. Ragnvaldr, I see you smiling and nodding back there, so I think you got something to say.
I'm smiling for 2 reasons. Sagan's, I made myself some notes and I'm like checking out things as Sagan says them. So it's like he's reading off my notes. So I would reiterate that for people who are listening, pay attention to what he said. I support all of it. The things I would add would be, just as he said, practice tournament at practice. And exactly like he said, the closer you get to actual tournament setting,
Yes.
the better. But I think it also goes the other way. A tournament is also practice. So I was doing some quick math in my head, and I can't even tell you exactly how many. If I ballpark, I've been to over 3,000 fighting events, counting practices. I'm sure it's more than that, but that's a good ballpark, which means I've fought literally tens of thousands of passes.
Mhm.
So when I go into a tournament and I fight someone in a tournament, what I ran into, this was my history with tournaments. Early on, when I won my first couple, I was still in this, wow, fighting is really cool, and I had no expectations. So the winning of the first ones, I was like, oh my God, I won some tournaments. But after a while, you'll find it, especially again in a higher level fighter, there's a period where you start to expect to win, and that was led to failures for me. As an example, in the Crown, right after I won my first one, I had been fighting a lot. I'd already won Crown. I looked around the list at everybody else who was fighting, and I quickly realized that I knew I could beat everyone there comfortably. And there were like maybe 2 people I was looking at. There were 2 or 3 that were like, okay, I'm gonna have to be on my toes with them. So, but I know I can beat them. What I had done was, in my own head, I'd done the opposite of what I was doing before, which was, oh my God, I'm in a tournament, I have to do really well. This frame of mind was, I got this. I'm going to win the tournament. I'm going to win Crown. And I was out in 3 rounds. I was out in 3 rounds because in my head, I had essentially already done the tournament. So when I got in the tournament, I was just going through the motions. You don't win a crown going through motions. And I had my ego stomped then, and it was a wonderful lesson, which is the point of it. When you fight, it's always practice. It's always a lesson. The frame of mind and what you're doing in a tournament is different, of course, than what you're doing at practice. You're taking everything you've learned and you are applying it right now to see what you are capable of at your present best. But don't feel like it's an end. When Sagan says you are being tested and we're trying to see the best you got, this is the best you got right now. This is not your best.
Absolutely.
For me, when I look back at those literally tens of thousands of fights, I remind myself when I step in the list, this fight is just another one in a long line of fights. So that's one of the things that helps me eliminate the pressure. I don't feel so much like, oh my God, I have to do well now because this is it. This is my test. If I fail here, then I'm a failure. There is none of that. All it has shown me is, just like Sagan said, when it comes down to it and I apply all my tools, where are my weaknesses? And again, Sagan's correct. When the level of a fighter gets higher, the measurement doesn't change. It gets more specific, but we can still win fights and fail at them. Brannis talked recently about a Candlemass he won, and he's done that several times. Everybody kind of expects him to. And he had good opponents. I think he had Duke Kellick in the finals. When he came home, he was very displeased. He did not fight well. He had poor footwork, and there were a couple other things that he had not done well that to us are major problems. Now his skill level was enough that he got through, but still, that was the point of it. It doesn't matter if this is your first tournament or your 7,000th fight. There's something in there for you to learn.
You know, your story reminds me, many years ago, a friend of mine, we met up at a tournament, and she asked me, like, would you coach me for the day for this tournament? And I said, yeah, I'd love to. You know, we haven't, there's no setup. I mean, the list was going to be open in 10 minutes. Like, there's not much I could do to prepare her. But I said, to start this out, what is your goal today? What is it you want to do in this tournament? And her answer was, I don't want to go 2 and out. I said, all right, that's a pretty reasonable goal. She was fairly new. I think she was in her first year and a half or so fighting. And so she fought her first round, won it handily over somebody with probably another year's or two's worth of experience over her. I'm like, that was great. Fantastic. Second fight goes out. She wins that one handily, you know, and it does it solid. Again, against somebody with a little bit more experience. And then the third fight, guess what? She loses.
Yep.
And the fourth fight, guess what happens there?
Yeah.
He loses.
Because in the second
back
fight,
to me.
the goal was met. Yeah.
And I said, what happened there? And because I said, these 2 opponents that you met in third and fourth round were really not any better than the ones you met. It's not like you ran into a Duke or something, or a Knight. You know, what was the difference? And I wanted to draw out of her I was in the first 2 rounds, I was fulfilling my goal of what I wanted to do. Like, I had a passion and a drive. And she admitted, like, once I was here, I succeeded in my goal.
Yeah.
And the mindset switched within that 1 round. It was that quick. And I said, well, what did you learn from this lesson of this tournament? I said, maybe I need to pick bigger goals. Now, you know, perhaps for her, it was not, I'm going to come into today and I'm going to win the whole tournament, because that's pretty broad. That's a pretty big bite to chew off in one go. But, you know, I think it gave her a really good sampling of where her skills were, and that she needed to raise the bar a little bit for where she was at. And, you know, of course, I tried to tune her a little bit with, all right, you know, to technique to try or things like that. But I didn't want to do too much, because you can really overflood somebody's brain when they're thinking, all right, I got to go perform. They should be executing what they practice before they get to the tournament, not what somebody that morning shows them. Like, that's a recipe for failure. But the mindset, and I've had this experience myself. In fact, I remember when I was preparing for the Cornet tournament that I eventually won, and I warmed up against a fellow Knight who I don't get to fight against very often. And in the warm-ups, I just rolled over him like a steamroller. And after I won that tournament, like within 2 weeks, I traveled to his home group. We just happened to be going to an event up that way, and we got to spar, and he just lit me up, because at that point it didn't matter to me. I wasn't there to absolutely hand him his lunch. And but that day, that morning, I was ready. I was prepared, even though I hadn't fought him for a couple of years before that. I had prepared myself, and I was all the cylinders were firing. Everything was exactly where it should be. And then, of course, once you win, then you're off into dealing with your Chamberlain, dealing with details, and you're not thinking of training anymore. You've done what you need to do. Now it's time to do a different job. Your goals shift yet once again. But that young lady who fought in that tournament and succeeded in her goal in the first 2 rounds, that was a huge lesson. I think that's something a lot of people can relate to, especially in their first couple of years of fighting, when they're like, I just want to not humiliate myself. And then they succeed, and it changes direction really quickly.
Yeah, one of the things that I kind of want to address a little bit too is one of the things I talk about in kind of helping mitigate the stress of the tournament environment is an understanding of the difference between the purpose of a tournament and the value of a tournament. The purpose of a tournament is wide and varied. Some of them are for positions of prestige, and some of them are for just shits and grins. And what that but the purpose. So the purpose, for instance, of crown tourney is to establish heirs for the crown. And the purpose of, say, a baronial defender tourney is who's going to defend the barony. Some of those lists, coronet list may not have quite as much prestige as a crown list, but it's still a royal list, and it's another level of competition higher than higher than a William Marshall tourney or what have you. But the value to me of tournament in general is consistent across the board, regardless of what the tournament format is and what the tournament purpose is. And to me, the value of that is isolating deficiencies and finding out what is wrong with your fight. And if you can approach any tournament, including crown tourney, from a perspective of being open to identifying your deficiencies and being open to the idea that regardless of how good your fight is, it can always be better. And if you're open to that, and you can simply execute whatever your fight is on that day without trying to be more than who you are, which is a lesson that, quite frankly, I've had to learn several times throughout tournaments. I've had a couple of crown tourneys that I thought I wanted to do well in, even long after I'd been a Duke. And I go into a tournament, I'm like, I want to do pretty well in this one, and there's this guy, and I got to do this thing, and and then it just turns out that trying to be something other than who you are is going to get you killed. And so for me, being able to look at it from a perspective of taking in the value of tournament and having somebody point out my deficiencies. And those may very well just be things that, I haven't practiced since the last time I was in a caliber of that tournament of that caliber, right? Because I haven't had to, right? We have skills that if you don't use these skills, they fade. And so if you're not put in a position where you have to have the mental exercise of tournament, those skills will fade. And so, but approaching it from a position of, just getting the value of the tournament, where you can, I think that helps in just being able to execute, as Ragnvaldr said, the fight you have today. Like, this is the best I have today. This is not the best I'm going to be. And in some cases, maybe this is not the best I've been. But this is what I have today. And for me, I know that You know, I can handle being beaten by somebody who is just better. One thing that really chaps my ass is not.
Losing.
It's not the losing. It's the not being true to myself, not putting out my best fight. If I put out my best fight and I get killed, that's fine. I got bested by somebody who is just better. If I go out there and just kind of half-ass it and I don't put out the best effort that I am capable of that day, that's where I'm going to find that disappointment. And I think that's what Ragnvaldr was talking about with Ron was coming up to us, this wrong, this is wrong, you know, and sometimes those are the things that even in victory, you got to look back at those things and say, what did I get away with? You know, what failures and deficiencies and shortcomings did I have against a class of opponent who simply was not prepared to take advantage of those deficiencies? That doesn't mean that I'm a complete fighter. It just means that the people that I was fighting on that day were not capable of capitalizing on my shortcomings.
True. And that's one of the other sides. When we talk mental, we've now talked about the young lady that Tristan was working with, right? And then we've talked about how Branos went through an entire tournament and then came home going, geez whiz. And that's all part of the mental side too, because Branos just went through a whole tournament. Okay? If he was so absorbed, he wouldn't have had the capacity to recognize all those faults, right? Where if you're just focused on that one goal in the beginning, that's one thing. When you get to the level of His Grace Branos, that's something else, right? And there's a line. Somewhere along this line is where you are in your fighting right now and where you want to be, okay? And along that line, you get to train, practice, and perform to get to the goal ultimately, which whatever it is. I want to be an excellent tournament fighter. Okay. I want to be an excellent war fighter. Okay. I want to go out every odd week and fight with my buddies. Great. Whatever it is, you have the capacity to identify. In order to be an excellent combat fighter, I recognize A, B, C, D, E, F, and then you keep track of where you are on each of those, mentally and physically. And the mental side will offer the most conflict at first, because at first people are action-based fighters, right? They're busy looking, you know, the novice or the newer fighters are, well, I think the helmet's open. Maybe I should, oh, he just moved to the left. Well, now I have to move over here. Oh, now he just moved the other way. So now I have to move over. Now he's further away. And they're action-based, so they're trying to figure all that out. Where the top 2% are reactionary. It doesn't matter what you do. That information is coming through their ocularium. Their mind and body are coupled to perform. So they really don't care what you do. And that's a major difference. Getting there from one to the other takes time. And just as His Grace said, you know, if for some of us, you know, I agree with His Grace. You go out onto the field and you try and give your best and you don't. Oh boy, yeah, there's something that's really hard to swallow, you know, and it's one of those things where, will it be the same each and every day in training, practice, and combat? No, it will not. But you do the best you can. You increase your percentages as you go along, and you realize there's this thing called real life. We've talked about that before too, that can affect all this. So in the end, all right, so we start out, and I put down some notes. I've written it down in a way that I have it somewhere else. But learning and repetition lead to knowledge. Knowledge and challenge leads to experience, good, bad, or otherwise. And then over time, experience comes together to a performance level that you're happy with. And that's where you want to be.
I think it's important as we talk here that, and I'm saying I think this is important because it was, for me, it became vital just in the past few years when I had some issues. We keep talking about our deficiencies and identifying those and correcting them. And I think that is vital. I also think it's vital to remind ourselves, especially in my case, of our successes. As I'd spoken before, sometimes I got so focused on my deficiencies that I consciously ignored any kind of successes. And my analogy with it was I was building a house, and if some of the bricks weren't in the right place or weren't there yet, and it bothered me, I would throw the whole house out and start over again, which is ridiculous. So you have to focus on what you're doing well, in addition. So what I'm hearing from everyone is a consistency that the point of the tournament is to identify deficiencies and get better. I think that's something we all want. I think it does also apply to Crown Tournament. One of the things that helped me with that was there's another Crown Tournament in 6 months or 4 months. So I would go into a Crown Tournament with focused on the one thing that I could rely on. And because I was always working to get better, the one thing you can always rely on in a Crown Tournament is your opponent is going to do his 100% best to beat you. He's not playing around today. You know, he may have had an off day or just showed up at practice, and none of that. He's there, she's there for one purpose, to beat you. And what a perfect opportunity to measure yourself, success or failure. What a perfect opportunity. And that you're guaranteed of. It's one of the beauties of Crown is that's a guarantee. Every opponent is there to beat you. Not there to play around for the, I got a chance to fight them, I'm going to go to Crown. Nobody does that. They go to Crown to win. I don't care who they are. And that's a wonderful measuring tool.
Yeah,
So,
actually, that's a great segue. I don't mean to cut you off there, Ragnvaldr. That's a great segue for a question we've got from one of the folks in the meeting room here. So I'm going to let Skalagram come on and introduce himself.
There we go. Had to unmute. Sorry. I am Skalagram from Midrealm, and just had a question about replicating the stress of Crown Tournament. Back in the days of dinosaurs, I fought in a couple or a handful of Crown tournaments, but now that I'm getting back into it, it seems like regular tournaments don't offer enough stress, and I haven't fought in a Crown tournament lately, but I know that the self-imposed stress that I will put on myself will make it much more stressful than it should be. So,
well said. Well said. Yes.
So do you have to be
put on yourself?
Right. Do you have to go to the dance multiple times in order to bring it down, or how do you deal with that?
I don't think you do. In this case, I would ask my favorite question: why? Your crowns are very stressful for you, more so than any other tournament, and you're sharp enough to recognize the difference in how it feels in a crown and how it feels in a regular tournament. So my first question would be, what about it in particular is creating the stress? And that would be the thing you want to try to replicate. So if it's as an example, maybe it's the pressure of others watching, somebody important is watching, and you don't want to let them down. Let's assume that that's what the pressure is. So then I would look to replicate that at whatever venue you can, whether it be other tournaments or in practice. So the consort you're fighting for, your instructor, your crown, find someone to whom it would be important for you, do the fights, and know that whatever the result is, you have to go to that person and tell them, I fought well, but I lost. I fought well, but I won. I fought poorly, I lost. I fought poorly, I won. You have to report that to the one to whom it's important. I don't know if that's your particular issue, but as a general rule for people, it's an extrapolation from what I try to do with practice all the time. In essence, what we're practicing is how we can fight using all of our skills. At practice, what you want to do is narrow down what is being done until you can until you can work on just the thing that is the weakness you want to focus on at that particular time. In this case, that's what you'd be doing, is bring it down to that issue.
One thing
Very
to
good.
consider too, and that is because what you're describing is what they call stress inoculation training, where you're trying to increase the stress in your training so you get used to it. It's not any big deal. Some introspection to figure out exactly what is introducing that stress to you is probably going to be the key to finding out how you solve your problem, whether that's performing in front of a crowd, which a lot of people have a crowd anxiety thing. One question I've found is very insightful to get an answer from yourself is, when do you fight at your best? When are you the most relaxed, the smoothest? When do you have the most confidence? How do you simulate that rather than simulating purely the stress level and putting stress on yourself? I think we perform how we practice. If you can perform calm and smooth, you get used to adding stress to you, but your goal is to remain calm, smooth, relaxed, fluid, observant. How you do your best fight, and you force yourself onto the stress rather than having the stress forced onto you to try to get yourself out from underneath it. I don't know if that explanation makes sense at all, but the way that you approach this should be, how do I get my best relaxed fight out of me, regardless of the environment and regardless of the venue. And I've seen people take a myriad of different approaches to this, whether it's how do I prepare in that morning? How do I prepare the week before the tournament? Sometimes in doing so, they over prepare and they wind up actually putting their mind right in the middle of all of that stress. And they become kind of like a diva, where everything's got to be perfect around them. Nobody can talk to them. They don't want anybody interfering with them. And others have built that kind of that inner confidence and mental strength to say, I've lined up my armor. I've got all my weapons ready to go. I arrive, in time to get my armor inspected, so I'm not late. I'm not a diva, but I'm also not, clumsy Clem showing up an hour late and then scrambling to try to get into the tournament where his mind is already checked out. Just find out for you, what do you need to be relaxed? And I've seen people that'll, before those tournaments, they'll put headphones on and they'll listen to their favorite music and they'll just kind of get in their zone. They don't want to be messing around with people because, crown tournaments, there's people running around like chickens with their head cut off all day long or all morning, and they're asking everybody, are you okay? Are you gonna? And they just don't want to hear anything about that. They just put themselves in their own place and say, I'm going to be relaxed and fluid, and by the time I get my helmet on, I've done my practice, I've got my training, everything's lined up, everything's where I need it, and that's where I'm going to get my best fight from the day. And they set themselves up mentally that way. And I wanted to mention this because I liked Sagan's continuum of you're from the beginning to the Duke level. In the middle, there's some places where people try a lot of experimentation. For example, they watch maybe boxers or MMA fighters or something, and they get amped up before a fight, and they think, maybe I'm going to try that. Maybe I should get amped up. I should, get on the adrenaline ride. And I tried that once, and I've seen other fighters try it, and I think more fighters fail with that method than succeed with it. I've only seen a couple that have liked it and keep going that way. And adrenaline and getting amped up is very exhausting. It will take your attention away. If you get too much adrenaline into your system, which you can do mentally, you don't need to be in a car accident to get adrenalized. You can introduce it to yourself, but it can cause your sense of touch to start to, you lose your sense of touch. It can alter other senses, your sense of hearing. So listening to the marshals can be a problem. Adrenaline will make you faster. It will make you stronger for a very short amount of time. So when people would talk about getting into the mindset, there are some traps that a young fighter may think, well, this will probably work. And they'll find out the hard way that it can, but it's got a lot more downsides than upsides. And I know I've strayed a little bit from your original question, but when it comes to mindset, I've found, and this is where the adrenaline thing comes in, find where you fight your best fight. What is the mindset that you execute best? And a lot of times that'll be at practice where there is no stress. You're just like, I'm here to fight. I'm here to have some fun, and I can be relaxed and fluid. Really connect with that and work at bringing that into your practice. And you could even say in your practice, like, I want 100, give me 100% fight to whoever your opponent is, and say, my goal when I ask my opponent to give me 100% intensity, mine is to stay calm, stay relaxed, have fun. And I like what Sean talked about of, or rather Ragnvaldr, about you're going to get 100% fight out of everybody at a crown tournament. Your goal is to stay calm and relaxed. And this is where I liked Wyatt Earp's description of learning to be a good gunfighter. He says you have to learn to move slow in a hurry. So it's be calm enough to move smoothly, without panicking, without scrambling, but do what you have to do. And I think that from a mindset, he had it right on the money.
Sagan?
Your Grace, you go first. I'd like to go last, please.
Okay, sure. So ultimately, you have to understand that Crown Tournament in particular, of all the tournaments that we have, Crown Tournament is not a physical contest. It is a mental exercise. There are plenty of people who have the physical skills necessary to compete well in Crown. But the people that do that win Crown with ease, if you will, and the people that win Crown a lot are the people that have found a way to mitigate the mental side of the fight. It is a mental toughness, and honestly, a lot of that it's not really a mental toughness. It's being comfortable, as Sagan has taught me, and we say all the time that fighting should be as comfortable to you as if you're sitting in your lazy boy with a beer watching a football game. Like, that is ease of your fight. Like, everything about it should be that normal, that relaxed, that easy. One of the reasons that Crown Tourney is such a mental test is because it is the highest position of honor in the society for the most part. I mean, it is kind of the tournament that's been around since day one. The idea that, and there's a lot of work, there's a lot of glory, there's a lot of responsibility. And when you pile all of that on, if you will, all that pressure, and Scalagram, you said it yourself, the pressure that I've created for myself, right? And it always is this pressure that we create for ourselves. One of the things that I talk about, one of the pieces of advice I give to people who are right on the verge and right on the edge of being able to do it, and that one piece that consistently has gotten people over the hump, if you will, is forget about winning the tournament. Just forget about it. And that's not to say that it's not a desirable thing to do, but if you can forget about that, and that will allow you to simply exercise your fight. And again, getting back to the value of the tournament, if you execute your fight, it's either good enough or it's not. And if you don't win the tournament, then you have an opportunity to find out why it's not. So if you can appreciate the value of it and forget about the winning of it, because we Tristan mentioned this, who's going to be the head of my court, who's going to be the captain of the guard, who's going to do this, who's going to do that, who's going to do that, right? You don't have to worry about any of that stuff until you actually win, right? And the reality is, you don't have to worry about it even after you win, because people are going to just throw themselves at you. Like, there's people like, I've been waiting for you to win crowns so I could be your wardrobe coordinator. I've been waiting to be crowned so I could be on your court, so I could be your shadow lane, so I could do this and I could do this. And I've been waiting for you. You would be amazed at how quickly your court comes together, and it's filled with people who want to be there and want to be part of it. So you don't have to worry about any of that. You don't have to think about any of that. And if you can not be thinking about those things, that's just one less thing or a dozen less things that you have to be concerned about going into the list. And that allows you to simply go into the list, execute your fight, execute the best fights that you have in that moment. That one of the things that Ragnvaldr kind of alluded to is like crown tourney is where you always get, everybody in crown tourney is fighting above their caliber. Some people are fighting above their calibration, but that's a totally different conversation. Everybody is fighting above their caliber. They're not just fighting their best. They're fighting, for most part, they're fighting better than their best because the stakes are so high, because the reward is so high. Everybody's fighting their best. And for that reason, from a training perspective, from you isolating deficiencies and finding out what is wrong with your fight, crown tourney is not necessarily the best test of your skill. I can give you a better evaluation in 3 fights than you're going to get out of 8 fights in crown and put you on a path to make you a better fighter, right? Crown tourney is the most consistent test we have. It's every 6 months for the most part, except in the West, where it's every 4 months. And again, you're fighting people who want to win. You're fighting people who are fighting above their caliber. Nobody's coming there just to play around. Like Ragnvaldr said, nobody's coming in pity patting this thing. This is something that people are fighting their absolute best. And for that, it is the most consistent test we have. And if you execute your fight, good, bad, or indifferent, assuming you don't win all of your fights, you have at least, in a double elimination system, you have at least 2 people who have bested you, who should be able to tell you what your deficiencies are. And that, again, is the value of the tournament. And you go to those people and you say, what did you see? How did you beat me? And most people that are capable of beating you at will, and repeat in a repeatable fashion, if you will, most people will know what they did and are more than happy to tell you what they did. And then even if they can't tell you how to fix it, they can tell you what they did. They can tell you their perspective and what they saw. And then you can get with your trainers, you can go to practice, you start working on those things, and you start eliminating that as a deficiency. And ultimately, from crown to crown, even if you're not going deeper in the list, if you make progress on the one thing that was your biggest deficiency in the last crown, then you just start chipping away at those things that are wrong. And if you can approach it from that perspective, it goes a long way in helping you deal with the emotional baggage that is surrounded with crown tourney. And it will go a long way towards you just forgetting about winning and just execute. Just fight your fight and use it as a tool to become a better fighter. Does that make sense?
I think so.
All right, Sagan.
All right. So thank you for coming forward with this question, and thank you for being willing to talk to us about it. The question obviously means you've identified something that's a negative aspect to your experience in tournament. Is it just crown, or is it any tournament at all?
I think real tournaments aren't real enough, and crown tournaments are too real.
Okay, there we go. We've already identified it. You have now put crown at a performance level quite a bit higher than anything else in your mind. The one thing is, if it's not a positive aspect we're dealing with in our performance, then it's negative. If it's negative, is it of any value? In this case, it sounds like it's dramatically affecting you in a negative manner, so we would say no. How far ahead of crown does this start? A week, 2 weeks, the day you get there?
I
Every
think
time you
at
think
crown,
about it.
I think at crown is when it becomes real.
Yes, exactly. And that's one of those things that we're doing fine. We're doing practice. We're doing training. We're doing this. We're doing that. And we're doing really good. And we go through practice tournaments. And then all of a sudden, it's Saturday in the park. Not only that, it's Crown Saturday. And in our head, that can take control. Now, from what you were saying, you have fought in crowns in the past, correct?
Yeah, a long time ago, though.
But you have that experience in that. Did this negative aspect show up then?
I didn't think that I could win then, but I want to win now.
Right. But the stress, was the stress?
No.
Good. So you have an object lesson, even though it's from your past, that I have done this before without stress. Now, one of the main things about a negative aspect is we identify, we acknowledge, and we mitigate, right? I'm being stressed. Why? So we identify why. Okay. Is it you that's putting the stress solely on yourself? Or is it you and others? Or is it just others? Well, you identify, then you acknowledge, okay, I get that, but to mitigate it, I don't want that to happen anymore. So then you come up with your plan, like His Grace or His Excellent Tristan was saying, I'm gonna negate that in these ways. Now, will it work right off the bat? Maybe not, but you don't give up, because the end goal is performance. On that day, you want to perform as best you can in each fight. So if it's one thing that's causing stress, that makes it kind of easy. If it's more than one thing, well, okay, you have to pay attention to each one. You acknowledge, identify, acknowledge, and then mitigate each one. Now then, the C word, whether it's the word competition or it's the word crown, that's one set of things that can trigger stress. The L word, as in loser, is another way to put stress on yourself. The one thing about stress is other people can bring it to you. You can bring it to yourself, but only you can accept it. So that brings us back to identify, acknowledge, and mitigate. So ease yourself into Crown Tournament. Maybe you start thinking about it a week ahead, going, Crown's coming up. I'm ready for that. I'm ready. When I get there, this whole stress thing that I've been doing, I don't want to do that anymore. And to sort of negate that, here's the things I'm going to put. I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to, be with my friends. I'm going to deal up with my armor and make sure all my weapons are ready. I'm going to go out and I'm going to warm up. Whether I get there on Friday, Crowns would say, you're going to do whatever you need to do to assure yourself that you are ready, that on Crown Tournament Day, you are absolutely ready to perform as trained in practice, and you are willing to accept the results of it. That is easier said than done, but I guarantee you, it'll be better than going through the stress that you are going through now. Besides, you're there for fun as well as performance. Stress doesn't sound like any fun, and you know that stress can negatively affect your performance. So I would leave you with, what question of what we've said would you like to ask of us now?
I guess I would like to turn it all on its head and say, how do you make real tournaments or just pickup fights? I know Ragnvaldr does a thing where he, centers himself or whatever and touches the ground with his sword. I don't know if that's his way of saying, okay, this is real. If I get touched, I've lost my limb for real, or what. But
That's thanks for remembering that. That's pretty cool. I'm going to tack something on to what Sagan said, then I'll address exactly what you're talking about. As I was listening to everybody's answers, which quite frankly are better than the one I had, what helped me when I started feeling that pressure of Crown, that I feel after I'd done the one I talked about earlier, the first Crown I won, I had recognized that everybody's giving 100%. That's what I went to get. And then I suddenly realized I was in semifinals. The one after that, I looked around and thought, I can win this. And then my mind wasn't in it and I lost it abysmally. After that, there became this pressure where others expected me to win because I'd been winning tournaments. I'd already won a crown, so I should win, right? So now there's all this pressure to win crown. And like Sagan said, I had accepted that pressure from others, whether that was their intent or not. So what helped me was to focus on the fact that this is not the crown tournament. It's a crown tournament. There's going to be another one in, like Tristan said, in 6 months, 4 months in the West. There's going to be another one in another 6 months. There's going to be another one in another 6 months. So what I did is I went to crown not to win, but to do my best as a way to see how well I can do in crown for the next crown. Okay, so that was one of the ways I took that pressure off. I tried a couple different mental tricks to try to set that aside or separate from that stress, and I could not do it. So what I did is I took that stress, I put it on the next crown. This crown, I'm going to do my best because I need to see what I can do at crown. But I'm not here to win this crown. I'm here to just do my best so I can do well in the next crown. And obviously the next step from that, of course, is when you get to the next crown, it's the same thing. Now I'm going to do the best again to see how much more I can learn for the next crown. So that's one of the ways I eliminated crown stress. What you're talking about is kind of an on switch. First, I want to repeat what His Grace Duke Uther from the West talked about his way of preparing for tournaments, especially for crown. He had this whole ritual of he'd make 5 swords, he'd take the best 3, and then he'd get there early so he could set his stuff up where he wanted it, the way he wanted it. He had his swords ready, his equipment was prepared ahead of time. He had this very specific set of things that he went through when he went to the list. This is where I take my lady to the list. This is where she stands. I don't have to look for her. What his purpose was is all these minuscule things were done. So all he had to do is focus on the fight. Obviously that works well for him. And I think it's a good tool for a lot of people. It doesn't work well for me. To me, that feels like a lot of things to work with. So what I focused on was those things don't matter. Ritual things don't matter. I avoided ritual things like the plague, because to me, if I tried to do them and one went wrong, then now I got to worry about it. Now it's a problem. But if I don't have those things to juggle, things changing, people running around, like Tristan said at Crown, running around all the time, that's cool. Say hello, wave, hang out with people, wander around a little bit. That was my way of doing it. But like you said, when the fight starts, that's what matters. And all that matters is that fight. So I came up with my own way of starting that fight. Its purpose was to center myself, put myself in the list, in the right frame of mind, and now I can fight. And like every other tool, that tool was practiced. I'll tell you what mine is specifically and why. But what's important about it is I developed it because it's exactly what works for me. Sir Hjorleif, his favorite is a swashbuckle. So when he's ready, he goes bang, bang on his shield. Bah, now he feels excited. Now he's ready to go. And for him, that works great. For me, there were 2 main things I wanted to focus on. My basic skills as a fighter, because the basics are what are most important, and to have that calm confidence. And for me, that came from my lady's face. So when I do that bow, the physical part is my sword goes straight to the ground. I crouch down and push the sword straight to the ground. This reminds me that my body will move in 3 dimensions and all my focus is straight. It reminds me of my physical abilities. The mental one, when I went down and I took a moment, I would picture Arabella's face and her calmness and her support of me. And that put me in the right frame of mind. Then I could fight. Then when I stood up, I was there for one purpose. I didn't care what the crowd was doing. Nothing else mattered. That person across from me, they were all that was important to me. So I suggest having those kinds of, it doesn't matter what they are, the swashbuckle, the bow, the kind of bow you use, the thing, whatever thing, it's part of a tool to put you in that frame of mind and take everything else and set it aside, whatever it may be.
You know what you talk about there, I've heard so many competitors say the same thing. I have one job and one job only, and that's my next fight. I'm not worried about the fight after that or the fight after that or the whole day or anything else. I have one job to do. And that may help you free up the stress of, well, I'm not worried about, you know, what our coronation is going to look like or what my garb that I need to make is or my next armor or any of that other stuff. You got one job and it's the next opponent, and that's all. Maybe that clarification. And I love, by the way, that description of how your little mini ritual, Ragnvaldr, centers you on that one thing. There's only one thing, and that's it.
Yes.
I operate very similarly. I'll cover that in a second. But one couple of things about so it sounds like what you're talking about is, you know, part of the question you asked is how do we make practice or other tournaments simulate crown tourney, and how do we make practice more like crown? And I would flip that around, honestly, and I would say, how do you make crown like everything else? How do you make crown like practice, so that when you go to crown tourney, you're doing exactly the same thing that you've been doing all along, without making crown more than it is? And don't get me wrong, it is more than it is. But if you treat it like that, it's the same problem. It's the same problem when you fight calibers of renown. You know, if you fight me, like, you've got a stick, I've got a stick, right? It starts fair. We both got a stick, right? Yeah, maybe I've got some experience, but if you treat me like I'm some sort of legendary super duke, then you're done, right? When you become concerned about what your opponent is going to do to you, you're done. The fight's over before it's even started, right? You need to fight me just like I'm anybody else, right? And when you can do that, you'd be surprised at how liberating it can be. Because even if you lose that fight, if you've put your best fight into it, at least you're part of the equation, right? I may win the fight, but if you forced me to fight, that is exhilarating to me. That is a thrilling fight to me, right? Ragnvaldr will tell you, like, I win no less than 70% of the fights, of all the fights I have. I win those fights on nothing but reputation alone, right? And if you force me to fight, I can and I will, but it's more work, right? If you're going to let me beat you on nothing but reputation alone, I will take that. I'll take it because it's easy. But you know what? You make me fight you, I'm going to remember your name, right? So instead of trying to make practice and other tournaments like crown, because there's nothing like crown, right? There is just no way to simulate that environment because the stakes are not as high. And we get it all the time. I want you to give you my crown caliber fight. I want to see what your crown fight is like. It's like, I can't. It's just not the same. So rather than trying to make everything else like crown, make crown like everything else. So it's just another day. It's just another walk in the park. Something else that Ragnvaldr talked about, and this is the kind of tourney ritual that we have, is if you look at professional athletes, one of the things that they do is not simply that they do the fundamentals better than everybody else. That is absolutely part of the equation. But one of the things that makes great athletes great is that it's always the same. Everything they do is exactly the same every time they do it. If you look at specifically basketball players, when they're shooting a free throw, the really great free throw shooters, right? you'll have the opposing fans underneath the basket waving all their batons and all this nonsense, right? They're waving all this stuff. Professionals don't see any of that garbage. Like, you can wave your hands and you can make all kind of vulgar noises and signs and everything. Professional athletes, they don't see that at all. It's just canvas to them. They see it all. I'm from Utah. One of our great Hall of Famers, Karl Malone, was one of the best free throw shooters of his era. Karl Malone had this thing where when you get to the free throw line, he'd bounce the ball several times. He'd spin the ball backwards in his hands, and he would like mumble something. They had professional lip readers that tried to read what he was saying, but it's like he was talking to himself and he was mumbling this thing. Nobody could ever figure out what it was that he was saying. And then he would just drain it, right? And that was all part of his process of making sure that the free throw was exactly the same every time. Does that mean he hits them 100%? No, it doesn't. But the more you can ritualize that and the more you can make it the same every time, that's how you normalize your tournament presence, right? So much like Ragnvaldr's ritual, when I fight tournament, salute the crown, and then salute the person who's favor your bear. Saluting my lady, saluting my inspiration is absolutely the most important part of that ritual for me. And the thing that I do is, first off, I decided a long time ago that I don't take a knee in the tournament for anybody except for my inspiration. So when I'm doing my salutes to the crown, I'll stand up. When I do my salutes to my lady, I take a knee and I'll kind of bow my head a little bit. And it's not prayer necessarily, but it's a moment of reflection. And for me, it's often, and it's as long as it needs to be, but it's typically not excessively long. And for me, it's just a moment of a clarity. That's a moment to remind myself, like I said, like Ragnvaldr said, it's that grounding moment where I take this pause and maybe I remind myself that, I need to advance, or, that like just, and it's never specific to the opponent that I'm fighting. It is always a reminder of what I need to do for me. And it's a moment that I have with my lady. And when I take that moment, when I stand up, laser focused on her, make that salute to her. She makes my salute to me. And after that, just like Ragnvaldr said, she's gone. Everything else after that disappears. And when I turn around and I face my opponent and I salute my opponent, that's it. That is the only thing that exists in my world at that moment. Because I'm not the type of inspiration fighter where in the middle of the fight, well, what is my lady going to think of this, and what am my lady going to think of this, right? I need to be free and focused on the job at hand. And the reality is, my lady inspires me to be who I am on a daily basis. And I need to be able to focus on doing this job right here. So as soon as I salute her, and she is the last thing I see before I engage combat. And that's all part of the ritual. It's all part of making all that exactly the same. So, and that doesn't mean the outcome is going to be the same every time, but the more you can make your fight the same all the time, the easier it is going to be. Because like these other guys have said, you are eliminating a lot of other stuff that is going to get in the way if you have to think about it. So.
Okay. So we started out with this being about you. I am going to end it about being about you. You go to training and you go to practice to learn how to perform combat at a performance level of your choice. When you go to Crown, that is where you get to test how well you are performing to the level you want to get to. That's what that day is. However, as these fine gentlemen have so well discussed and well described, there are many other aspects to a Crown. Stress, being a negative, will not allow you to give your opponent their just due, which is you fighting at your best performance level. And since you want that and they want that, I would encourage you to identify, acknowledge, and mitigate each thing that's causing you stress. Now then, are we here to help you with that? You bet. You want to contact me? Let me know. We can work on this together. And I am sure that in the short term, we can come up with something that will help you with your next Crown. And by the way, when is your next Crown?
Good question.
That's a really
Yeah, that
good
is a good
question.
question.
Yeah. So based on the answer that we all knew was coming, you have plenty of time to prepare for the next one, my friends.
Thank you all very much. I'm sorry to monopolize all this time.
No, no, we
Oh, no.
took.
No.
That's okay. It turns out we kind of like talking about fighting, so it's all good.
We do. Oh, yeah. That's right. We do.
Oh yeah. That's-
And other people need to be reminded that we love questions.
Yes.
do.
Speaking of which, it looks like we don't have any current questions here. We're about an hour and 20 at this point there. So if we don't have any questions, Tristan, you want to start wrapping us up?
Sure. As I went through this myself, I always like to come back to what are the most simple, tangible things that I can do rather than try to build like this hugely architected mental plan in my mind. And that's why one of the things that I found as I was talking with other competitors about just focus on that next fight. I found that if there was one tangible piece of advice that I always came back to was, as you're going through the mental preparations, and it's easy for you to think, well, what if I win? Just say, I'm not worried about if I win the tournament. I'm not worried about what happens that night, the next week. I'm not worried about it. As people ask you questions and they start flooding your mind with the kind of the what ifs, and wouldn't it be great if you won, and just say, does this have to do with me winning my next fight? Nope. Then it's not a priority. So I always like the simple, tangible, direct, right to the point lessons, because that's what your mind comes back to when it starts to get flooded, when it starts to, the confusion, the fog starts setting in of my brain's got all of these different things going on, whether it's your lead up to within your training to your Crown tournament or your Royal tournament, or even just doing a tournament you really want to win. Say, all right, what do I need to do to prepare? That's the next thing I should be doing. This very next thing right now is what I'm going to prepare for. It's not going to be the only thing. I'm going to do this until I've got this down to where I like it. Then I'm going to go to the next thing. Just focus on one thing at a time, all the way through that day. And it's just, all right, the next thing I have to do is get my armor on. I'm going to get my armor on. I'm going to get it done. And then the next thing I have to do is to go get inspection. I'm going to go get that done. They're kind of like opponents. You have to do each one of these things in order, do it well, and then move on to the next thing. So I like that tangible. It's just kind of my style, but I've seen that with many different competitors. They take a very similar approach most often. I've yet to run across somebody who says, I flood my mind with a bunch of stuff. That's what really makes me win tournaments. I've yet to hear anybody say that flooding themselves is a good plan. Stick with the simple.
Sagan?
Well, again, coming from the fact of being the trainer, it's the idea that my job is to train you, to get you to practice, in order to get you to combat. And performance, both mentally and physically, across all three of those, is my goal to get you to wherever your performance level is. Now, the mental side is, as I've pointed out a couple of times, a lot of times is the least trained, the least practiced, right? Oh, I lost to Bob. Well, I'm used to that. Oh, well, of course I lost. It was Duke so-and-so. Oh, it was what's his name with a glade, right? And those are excuses, to be quite frank, unless you're going, why? And you are identifying why, both mentally and physically, that negative outcome occurred. And then you bring that back. And if we need to train it, okay. If it's more practice, okay. But you take what you're given and you work with it after you've identified it. And the idea here is that in everyday life, there are times to practice and train, and then there are times where you can't. However, there are other things you can do, so again, when you come up with a training practice plan, you go to Crown, you come home from Crown, you maybe even at Crown, you're writing down what occurred, was pointed out, go up to your opponent. What did you see? Why did I lose? Right? What did you take advantage of, if you want to put it that way? And you log that down and you pay attention to that. Because while it may not have been a Duke that got you, it was somebody else that got you with something, and there was a reason. So ultimately, at the end of the day, you're in this and for your enjoyment, for fun. And the idea is when you go and you have done all these things and you go to Crown or you go to another tournament, right? We're specifically addressing Crown here. But if you go to another tournament, and it's the same idea. I trained, I practiced, I did combat, I got this result. Okay, what do I need to pay attention to now? Right? Because no matter how many wins you had or how many losses you had, it was one of those things that, okay, so I did great. I will now just hone everything I've got. If there were things pointed out offensively or defensively, then we're back in the mental physical. The idea here is take advantage of what you're given and deal with it and move on, because guess what? That day after Crown, it's time to go back to practice and training again. And there you are.
Ragnvaldr?
I liked what Tristan said about bringing this back to the simplest point. We have talked a lot about nuances in different ways and different techniques and different differences. And it's extremely valuable. I think to try to sum it up, this is what I have gotten from it, and I have gotten a lot from it. So before we go, I want to make sure I take a point and thank you guys for giving me some clarity on some things. Excuse me, and a way to look at this as a trainer as well. Think about why you're fighting in the tournament. What is your purpose for being there? And then the two things that we talked about to focus on was identifying deficiencies, a phrase I am wholly stealing from Sean because it's perfect. But remember, those deficiencies and the thing I added, your successes, are something that you're going to focus on after the fight. You could do that after every tournament fight. I did this, I did this, I did this. If you want input, grab somebody else who's your trainer and have them watch you and give you some, what did you see? Did you see what I saw? But that's for after the fight. During the fight, what you're looking for are techniques to come to one point. Make you and your opponent your only priority. Nothing else matters right then. Nothing. Like we talked about, and I'll try not to repeat it because we hit it pretty well. That's the summary. That's the stuff to focus on if you want to make a tournament a successful experience for yourself. That's what I see. That's what I've learned to clarify from these other gentlemen. So thank you for that, guys.
Yeah. So we originally intended to talk about the difference between, practice mindset and tournament mindset. We have focused quite a bit on the tournament, because honestly, that's where you make your money, as it were. That's where the chips are down, and this is for real. And the practice mindset basically goes back to preparing yourself to execute in tournament. And we need to make sure that in practice that we are taking the time to look at that from a perspective where where it is okay to fail. We need to make sure that we are creating an environment where it is safe for you to fail. But practice is where you take you have the luxury of failure, and it is that failure, and working through the process that is going to make you a better tournament fighter down the road. So take that time. Don't think that you have to win this fight, because it's more important to focus on your deficiencies and fixing your deficiencies, because practice is where we program the onboard computer, right? That's where we're making all the changes that we need to make. And when we make changes to our fight, failure happens, and we need to embrace that, and we need to use that time wisely, use that as a tool to better prepare ourselves and find those rituals, find those things that we can do to make, like I said, rather than making practice like Crown, let's make Crown like practice, or let's make Crown like other tournaments, and let's kind of normalize the Crown tourney and tournaments in general, so that when you go, you simply execute. I know, for me, when you tell me that something is a tournament, well, that just sets a certain flag in my programming, and it just tells me that it's just kind of game time. And so that's something we didn't really get much into, is how to flip the switch. But I think this is all part of that. Is you program that at practice to learn those things. So want to thank everyone for joining us. And as always, we have to say thank you to Vesper for
Absolutely.
for hosting.
Thank you so much for taking the time.
Keeping us on
Thank you.
keeping us on track and getting us live and all that good stuff, and bringing up the questions for us. Next week, Tristan, do you want to talk about next week's episode?
I would, but remind me. This has been a flood week for me. So
Okay, this is the elephant in the room.
the elephant in the rooms. Yep. And this was, I don't know if we've actually, if I recall the exact topic we picked for it, but the basic theory of these elephant in the room is we want to discuss the uncomfortable questions that people often have about fighting in the SCA, and the stuff that I think a lot of people want to know the answer to, but maybe are a little too bashful to ask. So we will be posting up the exact topic of that probably in the next few days. But we do want questions, but we're going to try to, we realize that some people may be just even too shy to ask through social media. So we're going to start with a few of our own questions that we know get asked a lot, generally behind the scenes, discreetly, like, hey, what's going on here? So we want to take on the difficult questions with, what's up with how things work. And so we're going to be going into that. If I remember right, I think we talked about discussing things like calibration and ego, and how to deal with somebody who's just not willing to accept defeat, and how to handle that, and oftentimes what causes it, things like that. But we're going to wind up touching on this topic and wind up getting into probably quite a few others, because there's a lot of interest in it.
All right.
Yeah, and this is something that this is something that we've kind of decided to. It can be a touchy subject. It can be difficult things to talk about, but we feel that we have collectively discussed it and feel like we have a bit of a responsibility to talk about some of these other things that affect the SCA, the tournament culture, and the fighting environment, and how we can help people, get through these things. Like I said, I don't know that we've kind of nailed down the exact topic for next week, but this is something that we're putting in something of our rotation. So we are open to having these discussions, getting you, and we'll definitely have some guest speakers with us as well from across the society that have kind of dealt with some of these issues. So if you have any questions, or if you have a topic that you might like to suggest, that we can have a difficult conversation about, let's do that. So that's the plan for next week. So Sagan, Ragnvaldr, as always, Tristan, all you guys, really appreciate your time, your insights. Thanks to the program. I think just on a conversation path that we were all quite happy to talk about.
Really appreciate you guys.
Vesper, thanks again.
Thank you.
This
Thank
is usually
you.
the highlight of my week. I always enjoy Friday nights.
Here we
So
go.
it's great to see
Here we
everybody.
go.
It is the highlight of a lot of people's weeks, actually,
Well,
from what I hear.
And in about an hour, we get to sit down and watch Between Two Peers with Helga and Tulia, and they've got Duke Thorfinn from the West Kingdom on, who happens
there
to
we
be
go.
that's Tulia, who's one of the hosts of Between Two Peers. It's part of the drinking game when Tulia says, "My boyfriend Duke Thorfinn." So he's going to be on tonight. So there might be a lot of my boyfriend Duke Thorfinn. So that's one of the next highlights of my day. I get done with this and I go watch Between Two Peers.
Well, be sure to share that link, Your Grace. That sounds like fun.
Yeah, we can do that.
Okay.
And
Well, until we meet again, may your training, practice, and combat bring you joy. And if it doesn't, we're here.
Perfect.
Thank you, gentlemen. Have a wonderful week, and we will see everybody again next week.
Thank
Good
you.
night. Have a great
Enjoy your
weekend.
holiday weekend.
Bye.